Hey there, book dragons. Welcome back to my channel. It's time for a book review. Let's go. Thank you to my patrons. I really appreciate all you do to support the channel. I read Dune Messiah back in November, and I have a little bit of a history with Dune Messiah. When I originally read Dune for the first time, a few months later, I also started reading Dune Messiah. At the time, it did not click with me, and so I decided to put it on the back burner for some future date, which just happens to be many, many years later. And since then, I've read Dune a second time, but I've still never read Dune Messiah until last month, so I was determined I was going to read Dune Messiah and continue with the Dune saga and see where it goes. And I'm very happy I did. Please make sure to like and subscribe and all the normal stuff I talk about. You know the drill. Check out my links in the description below. Let's get right to the review. And I do want to let you know that this is going to be a spoiler-free review for the book. However, please keep in mind, if you have not read Dune, there are going to be some necessary spoilers. I just can't avoid it. And normally for a second book in a series, I don't do a full review because I want to avoid spoilers. But I think Dune Messiah deserves a full-fledged review from me. I really do. And so if you have not read Dune, please tune out now. But I have a feeling that most people that are watching my channel have probably read Dune or tried Dune at some point. They may have seen the movies, whether it's the original movie or the new movie by Denis Villeneuve. So I'm not too worried about giving these spoilers in this review. But I am going to keep my thoughts on Dune Messiah pretty spoiler free. Okay, so no worries if you read Dune and you're coming to Dune Messiah fresh, you've never read it. I do plan to keep it spoiler free. So I'm going to talk first about the setting of Dune Messiah. We're going to talk about the story and some of the characters. And then I'll let you know some of my pros and cons from the book. Okay? For such a small book, it really packs a lot into the story. It's about 300 pages, maybe a little more, so it is a relatively short book, especially compared to Dune. I think Dune is like 500 pages, or maybe 600 if I remember right. So it's a bit chunkier than Dune Messiah. Dune Messiah is probably the shortest book in the entire Dune saga. It takes place 12 years after the events of the original Dune book. Paul Atreides is firmly in place as emperor, and most of the known universe is united under his rule as a result of the jihad that he conducted across the universe. So if you read the original Dune novel, you know that the word jihad came up a lot in the book, the philosophies around it, the ideas behind it. The jihad is a holy war, essentially. You're probably familiar with that from that book. So this book takes place after the jihad has already occurred. Paul Atreides is not only firmly in place as emperor, but he is also the theocratic leader of Arrakis and of the empire, shall we say, that is under his control. And when I speak of a theocracy, I am referring to the fact that he is the god king that is worshipped by millions across the galaxy. And there are many who make pilgrimages to Dune to go to his holy sites and to this temple that has been set up, which is Sister Alia presides over, actually, as a priestess. And it's it's a very, very different world than we encountered in Dune. So much time has passed. There has been plenty of time for the religious myths to be built up and for Paul to become this God figure over a significant portion of humankind. And there are, secret societies that have sprung up and everything trying to further the cause of Paul Muad'Dib. So it is a very different world that we're coming into. The sieges are in full vigor. They are firmly working to bring life and abundance to the desert planet, and it's just a very different world. It's different in a good way. I think if Frank Herbert had tried to write a direct sequel to Dune, where it was following right after the events of the first book, I don't think that would have worked very well. And I could be wrong. There is a book that takes place during that time period. It's written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. It's part of the expanded Dune universe. If you want to, you can check that out. But it is not the core Dune saga. It's expanded information. So I haven't read it. I don't know much about it. I plan to read that one eventually, at least, because I am curious what they have to say about the in-between time of this large expanse of time that has elapsed between book 1 and book 2. So now we'll get to the story and kind of the basic plot structure. This book is very, very politically driven. It features heavy amounts of political intrigue. There are conspiracies and plots to overthrow Paul and stage a coup. And it's just a handful of characters that are working behind the scenes to make this happen. And they have become very dissatisfied with what Paul Atreides has accomplished and set up. Whether or not they believe that it was all his doing is beside the fact. He is the emperor, he is the god, and they're not satisfied, largely because of their own interests not being realized, and so they have decided to work behind the scenes to overthrow Paul Atreides. This is a much bleaker story in many ways than Dune was. While Dune was fraught with turmoil and all the stresses and frustrations of moving to a new world and getting set up in said world and learning to live life in a culture that is not your own, it was a largely positive story, in my personal opinion. There were definitely things that were negative in that book, but it was a largely positive book. The ending of the book was a very positive ending. It ended satisfactorily, and it could easily be a standalone book, which it was kind of originally intended to be before he decided to write the other books in the saga. So it was largely positive, but this world is much bleaker. In book 1, in Dune, you really see the positive sides of the power and authority that Paul Atreides wields. In Dune Messiah, you see a very different portrayal of power. It is a very dark and negative, corrupted power in so many ways. So you see a very big transition from Paul being the protagonist in book 1 to almost being an anti-hero and maybe even being an antagonist in Dune Messiah. Not to any great extreme by any means. He is still a very well-loved and powerful figure in this world, but it is becoming clear that with power comes the great potential to let it go to your head in so many respects. So there are definitely those themes of the corruption of power showing up in this book, and there are themes of religious overlording going on in the book as well, because the cult of Muad'Dib has become very, very strong and powerful in its own right, almost to the point of overtaking Paul's authority. Not quite, but it almost gets to that level. And so it's a very, very good look at the flip side of power. I absolutely love that about this book. We do have some recurring characters that pop up in the book as well that you would be familiar with from book one. Paul Atreides is, of course, there. You have his concubine Chani, which he fully considers to be his true wife. And then, of course, he is also married to the Princess Irulan, which is how he was able to take power as emperor. She is the daughter of Shaddam IV, who was displaced by Paul. And yeah, so she is his official and legal wife. But the one that he truly loves, of course, is Chani from the first book. So both of those characters are there. Irulan has a much more expanded role in this book, which I thought was great. You see glimpses of her in book one, and there's a lot of excerpts from her writings and her journals about Muad'Dib in book one, but you don't really see a whole lot of Irulan personally, and you do very much in this book. I really, really like that. You did see Chani a lot as well, even though she featured very prominently in the first book. You see a lot of her in this book as well, and of course Paul. There is a sorry, I'm going to mispronounce it. Tleilaxu, which is an alien race of shapeshifters, essentially. It is a new alien race that appears first in this book. They are briefly mentioned, I believe, in the first Dune book, but we don't see them featured prominently until this book. And so they are shapeshifters, face changers, and they can be used for political maneuvering. And that's all I'm going to say because I don't want to spoil anything. So the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam also makes another appearance in Dune Messiah, and her role is somewhat less at the forefront in Dune Messiah, but it is still very prominent, and I continue to really enjoy her character. She is definitely an antagonist, and you'll find out why when you read the book. We also have the first appearance of the guild navigators and their crew that are fed the spice drugs directly into their frontal cortexes. It's kind of weird and kind of gross, actually. But if you are familiar with the original Dune movie by David Lynch, we did see the guild navigators in that movie, but they do not make an appearance in the books other than a brief mention in the first Dune book. They don't make an appearance until Dune Messiah, and you really get to know the guild navigators quite well. One guild navigator specifically is mentioned in the book, and a lot of time is devoted to that character. And I really enjoyed getting to know those two new characters, the guild navigator and the Tleilaxu face changer. We do see some familiar faces pop up in the book as well. I'm not going to go into spoilers. There is what's called a Ghola in the story, and a Ghola is essentially a carbon copy of a previously deceased person. And they are also created by the Tleilaxu, and they're very useful in political maneuvering as well. And I'm not going to tell you who the Ghola is. It's really, really fascinating, and I loved it. Definitely want to draw attention to that because it features very prominently in the story. So I hope you enjoy that in the story as much as I did if you get to read this book. Of course, Alia is there as well, or Aaliyah, however they pronounce it. But Paul's sister, she is now fully grown to about the age of 16 in this book, and considered a woman full grown, and her body has now grown to somewhat match the extent of her powers. She still possesses the Bene Gesserit training and the Bene Gesserit knowledge. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, she is a priestess of the Muad'Dib cult. The way these characters have been set up in the story is just really fascinating. And I just really had a blast reading this book. This book gets a lot of dissension because of how different it is from the first Dune book. And that kind of leads me into the pros and cons. To be honest with you, I don't have any cons. I can see how people would have cons, though. Paul continues to be a very cold and calculating person who doesn't really have a wide range of personality. He's very methodical. He's very analytical. And a lot of people are bothered by that. And I can see why, because, you want to be able to relate to your characters on some level. I know I do. But for some reason, it just works with me. And knowing that Paul was designed not only with the Bene Gesserit training in mind, but he was also trained as a mentat. That type of person doesn't really have a personality, so to speak. At least not an engaging or very personable personality. So it just kind of goes with the territory. You kind of have to expect that. Does he have emotions? Yes. He exhibits emotions. It's very rare, and you just kind of have to expect that. One of the other prominent characters in the story is also trained as a mentat, and so you get two mentats in a room together, and you're just in for a long, boring dialogue of all these technical and philosophical matters, and I just ate it up. But I can see why people would be bothered by it. So if I was to say that there's one con in the book, I'm saying it from the perspective of other people, not from myself, okay? But I thought it was really well done. It was really well paced. And if you enjoy political intrigue, you are going to be very much at home in this book. And in this new world of Arrakis that is a little over a decade older than what you experienced before in the first Dune book. It's really fantastic. I highly recommend it. I personally think the character work is on equal par with the original Dune book, if not expanding so much on the characters that we already became acquainted with. For instance, you get to see the mindset of Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam as she is working behind the scenes, and you get to see some of her little intricacies, and you get to meet some of these new characters that I talked about before, and you get to find out what makes them move and tick, and it's just really, really fascinating. And part of the scheme to hopefully one day stage a coup directly affects both Irulan and Chani. And that's all I'm going to say. But it is a very intricately woven plot point that adds so much to the story. And I can't wait for you guys to experience this book. I gave it my highest rating. I would totally read it again. This book soars for me. This is my top tier. It soars. It really does. So I can't wait to continue the saga and see where it goes from here. I'm very anxious to continue and read Children of Dune and hopefully finish out the saga. So let me know in the comments, have you read the book? What are your thoughts on it? Have you been on the fence with it? Have you avoided reading it because of all the mixed reviews that are out there? And there are a lot out there. So I totally get that. Let me know in the comments. Hit me up on my Discord if you want to go into this book more in depth. That would be really awesome. And I think that is about it from me today, guys. Make sure that you read more books. We'll talk soon.